I was pouring my morning coffee in the kitchen when my son dropped a stack of papers onto the table. "Dad, you should sign these," he said casually. "Managing money at your age is getting harder." My daughter-in-law smiled and slid a pen toward me. "We're only trying to help." I glanced at the documents, then at the bank statement hidden beside my cup. "Last night, someone withdrew thousands using my PIN. Is this really for my benefit?" I asked. They exchanged one quick look. That was when I knew. "I appreciate you taking the time to listen. Before the story continues, I'd like to hear from you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with someone you loved? Leave a comment below. This space is better when you're in it." One note, some details are adjusted for storytelling and reflection, but what matters most is the message this carries. My thumb hovered over the call button. Detective Desmond Pierce stood to my left, his 49 years of financial crimes investigation compressed into a single whispered question. "Are you sure, Mr. Hayes? Once you make this call, there's no going back." Through the window, headlights swept across my driveway. Silas's car. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. The detective nodded once. Behind us, Luther Garrett shifted his weight, the leather of his shoulder holster creaking in the silence. At 70, Luther had spent 40 years with Savannah PD learning to spot liars, and tonight he'd watch his best friend do the hardest thing a father could do. Outside, two unmarked police cars sat with their lights off, engines idling in the January cold. I pressed call. Silas didn't know it yet, but the trap he'd spent 18 months building had been built around him instead. At 38, my son still had that confidence he'd carried since high school, the kind that made people trust him without thinking twice. I used to be proud of that. The phone rang once, twice. "I'm 68 years old. I spent 5 years in quiet retirement, after my wife Ruth died, tending azaleas and drinking coffee on the back porch. That Tuesday morning in November 2021 was supposed to be like any other. It wasn't." Detective Pierce touched my shoulder. "Units are moving." Silas's car door opened. I could see his silhouette in the porch light reaching for something in the back seat. Papers, probably. More papers to sign, more reassurances that he was handling everything that Dad didn't need to worry about complicated financial matters anymore. "Mr. Hayes," the voice on the phone said, a dispatcher I'd never meet. "We're proceeding now." I hung up. Luther exhaled slowly beside me. We'd known each other since Ruth was alive, had watched our kids grow up together, had buried her side by side at Bonaventure Cemetery. He'd been the one to tell me 3 months ago that I needed to call the police. He'd been right, but to understand how I got here, how a father ends up calling the police on his own son, you need to know where it started. 14 months earlier, on a morning that felt like any other. November 2021, Tuesday. The kitchen smelled like coffee and the azaleas blooming outside my window. Morning sun painted gold stripes across the breakfast table where Ruth and I had shared 43 years of quiet mornings. I still set out 2 cups every day. Old habits. I poured coffee black, no sugar. Unfolded the Savannah Morning News. The routine was supposed to help, the grief counselor had said. Routine creates stability. So every Tuesday I reviewed my bank statement, same as I'd done for 30 years. The Wells Fargo envelope sat beside my coffee cup, already opened. I'd learned to use the online banking eventually, but I still liked paper. Something you could hold, verify with your own eyes. I scanned the usual entries. Social Security deposit, utility bill, Publix grocery, my retirement account transfer. Everything normal until line 17. A TM withdrawal, $3,200. November 9th, 2021, 2:17 a.m. Industrial Park, ATM at Berwick Road. I set down my coffee cup. Read it again. 21:17 in the morning, I said aloud to the empty kitchen. I'm usually in bed by 10:30. Berwick Road. I knew that area vaguely. Industrial district on the east side near the port. Warehouses, shipping facilities. I'd never had reason to go there, certainly not at 2 in the morning. I picked up the phone, started to dial the bank's fraud line, then stopped. $3,200 was a specific amount, not a round number someone might guess. And the PIN had been entered correctly on the first try. I checked the notation at the bottom of the transaction line. No asterisk, no flag for multiple attempts. Whoever made that withdrawal knew my PIN. I stood up, walked to the window. The azaleas Ruth had planted were blooming pink and white, exactly like she'd planned them 15 years ago. She'd always thought ahead, Ruth. Always saw what was coming before I did. How long does it take for trust to die? For me, it started with a single line on a bank statement. I'd set up that PIN years ago, the year Silas graduated high school. Used it ever since. Never written it down, never saved it on my computer. The bank had asked me twice to update it for security. I'd refused. I liked consistency. Only 2 people knew that number. Me and Silas. I'd given it to him years ago, back when Ruth was sick, and I needed someone to help with errands. Cash withdrawals when I was at the hospital. Bill payments when I couldn't think straight. He'd been 25, then responsible, careful with money. My son. I sat back down at the table. Looked at the statement again. The transaction was 2 weeks old. November 9th. I tried to remember that night. Nothing special. I'd gone to bed at 10, same as always. Read half a chapter of a Tom Clancy novel. Fell asleep with the lamp on. My hands were shaking. I told myself there had to be an explanation. A mistake. Maybe Silas had needed emergency cash for something had been embarrassed to ask. We'd laugh about it later. I'd call him, he'd explain, everything would make sense. But the PIN had been entered correctly on the first try. No failed attempts, no hesitation. Someone who knew it well. I set the statement down on Ruth's empty placemat, beside the coffee cup I'd poured for a ghost. Outside, a mockingbird landed on the azalea bush and started its morning repertoire. The sun climbed higher. The coffee grew cold. Only 2 people knew my PIN number. Me and the son I'd raised alone after his mother died. Only 2. I didn't have time to call the bank. That same Tuesday afternoon, Silas walked through my front door using his spare key like he owned the place. Leonie trailed behind him in white silk and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Dad," Silas said, dropping his briefcase on my kitchen counter with the casual authority of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. "We need to talk about your finances." Leonie Reyes Hayes was 36 and put together in a way that felt rehearsed, like she'd studied the right poses in a mirror. She'd been married to my son for just over years, and I'd never once seen her flustered, never once caught her without that careful, composed expression she wore like armor. Even now, at 4 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, she looked ready for a performance. "Hello, Vernon," she said, her perfume reaching me before she did. Gardenias deliberately strong. "We've been worried about you." I stood in my kitchen doorway, still holding the bank statement I'd been staring at all morning. Silas didn't seem to notice. He spread papers across my kitchen table, the same table where I'd discovered the unauthorized withdrawal 6 hours earlier. Bank authorization forms, power of attorney documents, everything printed on heavy cream paper that probably cost extra. "Dad, you're 68 now," Silas said, pulling out a chair like he was hosting the meeting. "Managing money gets complicated at your age. Technology isn't really your generation's strong suit." I'd built a career as an electrical engineer. Designed circuit boards when computers were the size of rooms. But I said nothing. Leonie touched my arm, her hand cool and soft. "Silas really is excellent with money management, Vernon. It would be such a weight off your shoulders." They stood on either side of me, a coordinated performance. I watched them exchange a glance, quick and practiced. Leonie nodded almost imperceptibly. Silas smiled. "We've already drawn up the paperwork," he said, sliding a pen across the table. "Just needs your signature. I'll handle everything. Bills, investments, taxes, you won't have to worry about a thing." The pen sat there between us, black and expensive looking. "That's very thoughtful," I said. Silas relaxed. Leonie's smile widened a fraction. "I'll need to think about it," I added. The smile didn't falter, but something shifted behind Leonie's eyes. Cold, calculating, like a door closing behind a locked room. Silas leaned forward. "What's to think about Dad? You trust me, don't you?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "Of course I trust you," I said. "You're my son." It wasn't a lie. Not exactly. I trusted that he was my son. I trusted that he'd grown up in this house, that Ruth had loved him, that I'd taught him to ride a bike in the driveway, where his car was now parked. Everything else was suddenly negotiable. "I just like to sleep on big decisions," I said. "Old habit." Silas gathered the papers with movements that were a touch too quick, too tight. "Sure, Dad, take your time. We just want to help." They left 20 minutes later. I watched from the window as Silas opened the car door for Leonie, his hand on her lower back, proprietary. They didn't look at each other. Didn't speak, just got in the car and drove away. I'd been thinking about this for 3 weeks already. Every word they'd spoken, I'd already heard in my head. 3 hours later, alone in my study, I stared at Ruth's photograph on my desk. She was laughing in the picture caught mid-sentence at our 40th anniversary dinner. 5 years gone, but the frame still smelled faintly of her hand lotion when I picked it up. Lavender. What would you make of that performance? I asked her. The photograph didn't answer, but my eyes drifted to the oak cabinet behind my desk. Bottom drawer, left side. I'd opened it maybe twice since Ruth died, both times looking for old tax returns. Now I pulled it open and reached past the file folders to the back corner where a yellowed envelope sat sealed with wax. Ruth's handwriting on the front, Vernon open, only if someone too perfect enters your life. My hands shook as I broke the seal. The letter was dated 8 years before Ruth died. 15 years ago. Silas had been 23, unmarried, working his first real job in Atlanta. Vernon, if you are reading this, you have already met that person. The one who is too charming, too helpful, too concerned about your welfare. I won't be there to warn you, so I'm warning you now. Don't rush. Observe. Write down what you see. Dates, times, inconsistencies. Naomi has everything you need. Trust her. Trust yourself. And remember, real love doesn't perform. It just is. All my love, Ruth. I read it 3 times. Set it down. Picked it up again. How does a woman who's been dead for 8 years protect her husband from a threat that hasn't even appeared yet? How does she know to leave instructions with an attorney for a scenario? She'd never witness. Ruth Hayes had been the smartest person I'd ever known. She'd taught high school mathematics for 30 years and could spot a student lying about homework from across a crowded cafeteria. She'd known I'd need protection, known I'd be vulnerable, known someone would come. She just hadn't known it would be our son, and the woman he'd chosen to bring into our family. I folded the letter without finishing and picked up the phone. Naomi Brennan answered on the second ring. Vernon, she said, her voice warm with surprise. It's been months. How are you? I need to see you tomorrow morning, I said. Ruth left me something. Silence on the other end. Then you found the letter. You knew about this. I've been waiting for this call for 8 years, she said quietly. Come to my office at 9. And Vernon, bring the letter. There's more. She hung up before I could ask what she meant. I sat in my study as twilight turned to darkness. Ruth's letter in my hands, the photograph watching from my desk. My wife had known. 8 years before any of this happened, Ruth had already written the playbook. She'd left me not just a warning, but instructions, and Naomi Brennan held the rest. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my study with Ruth's letter and tried to remember when it had started. When my son had first looked me in the eye and lied. 5 years before I found that bank statement, before Leonie entered our lives, before any of this nightmare began, Silas walked into my study and asked me for $45,000. It was spring 2018. Ruth had been dead for 2 years. I'd retired the year before and was still learning how to fill the empty hours. Silas was 33, living in Atlanta, working for some tech startup that sounded impressive when he described it, but vague when I asked for details. He showed up on a Saturday morning without calling first. I was in my study going through old photographs, trying to decide which ones to frame for the hallway. He knocked once and walked in already talking. Dad, I've got an incredible opportunity, he said, sitting in the chair across from my desk like he was pitching a boardroom. Commercial property on River Street, historic building, perfect location. The seller needs to close, fast estate situation. I just need $45,000 to secure it before Friday. I remember setting down the photograph I'd been holding. Ruth and Silas at his high school graduation, both of them laughing at something I'd said off camera. $45,000, I repeated. I know it's a lot, Dad, but this is the kind of investment that sets you up for life. The rental income alone would cover the mortgage in 3 years. After that, it's pure profit. He had spreadsheets, pulled them out of his briefcase, and spread them across my desk, pointing to numbers that were supposed to mean something. Projected returns, market comparisons, tax advantages. I've already talked to 3 commercial lenders, he said. They'll cover 70%, but I need to show earnest money by Friday, or the seller walks. Dad, this is it. This is my shot. I looked at my son, watched him lean forward with that intensity he'd inherited from Ruth, that absolute certainty that he was right. His hands moved when he talked, gesturing at numbers and possibilities. You don't have to pay this back, son, I said, reaching for my checkbook. Consider it an investment in your future. The relief on his face looked genuine. He hugged me, told me I wouldn't regret it, that I was giving him the chance to build something real. I wrote the check right there, $45,000, signed it, and handed it across the desk like I was paying for dinner. Thank you, Dad, he said. Seriously, thank you. He left 20 minutes later. I went back to sorting photographs, feeling proud of myself for helping my son chase his dreams. I never asked for updates about the property, never asked to see closing documents or rental agreements. That's what trust meant to me then, believing without verifying, loving without questioning. There's a difference between loving your child and enabling their destruction. I didn't know that then. I thought unconditional love meant unconditional support, no questions asked. I thought being a good father meant always saying yes. 4 months later, Luther stopped by with a bottle of whiskey and a face that told me something was wrong before he said a word. We sat on the back porch. He poured 2 glasses, slid one across the table to me, and said, I need to tell you something about Silas. I'd known Luther since Ruth was alive. He'd been Savannah PD for 40 years before retiring, and he still had connections all over the city. The kind of man who heard things before they became official. The money you gave him, Luther said, it didn't go to any property. The whiskey burned going down. What are you talking about? Vernon, I know the dealer he paid off. Underground poker games on the west side. 45,000 in debt, exactly. He'd been playing above his limit for 6 months. These aren't friendly games. These are the kind where people get hurt when they don't pay. I set down my glass. There's no commercial property, Luther continued. No historic building on River Street. I checked county records. Nothing sold in that price range all spring. He lied to you. The azaleas were blooming. Ruth had planted them 15 years before, chosen varieties that would bloom in sequence from March through May. She'd planned everything, Ruth. Thought ahead, saw patterns I missed. How long have you known? I asked. 2 weeks. I wanted to be sure before I said anything. Does he still gamble? Luther refilled both our glasses. I don't know, but Vernon, a man who can lie to his father that smoothly with spreadsheets and projections and performance. That's not a one-time thing. That's practice. I should have confronted Silas. Should have demanded an explanation, set boundaries, made it clear that lying had consequences. I did nothing. I told myself he'd been desperate. That gambling addiction was a disease that shaming him would only make it worse. I told myself a good father forgave. A good father understood. A good father gave his son room to make mistakes and grow. How many times did I hand over money without asking a single question? How many times did my generosity teach him that accountability didn't matter? That Dad would always write another check, always believe another story, always choose blind faith over difficult truth. Every dollar I gave without verification was a lesson in exploitation. Every time I said yes without asking why, I taught him that trust was something you could weaponize, that love meant never having to prove anything. I created the man who would stand in my kitchen 5 years later with his calculating wife and printed bank forms, expecting me to sign over control of my entire financial life without question. Because I'd trained him to expect exactly that. I lent him the money because that's what fathers do. I never asked what it was really for because I thought trust meant blind faith. That was my second mistake. The first was thinking my son couldn't lie to me. But understanding my mistakes with Silas didn't prepare me for what Luther discovered about Leonie. 3 days after I found Ruth's letter, he called and said, "Come to my office, don't tell anyone." Luther spread the Charleston police files across his desk like a hand of cards. Each document more damning than the last, and I realized I was looking at a blueprint for murder. Roland Whitmore, Luther said, tapping the first file, 62 years old, widowed for 3 years when he met Leonie, married her after 6 months, dead 14 months later. Heart attack, the coroner said. Roland Whitmore had been a successful Charleston real estate developer who made the fatal mistake of marrying Leonie Reyes and dying 14 months later. His photograph stared up at me from the police report. Distinguished-looking man with gray hair and kind eyes. He was wearing a tuxedo in the picture, standing beside Leonie at what looked like a charity gala. His hand rested on her waist, She was smiling at the camera with that same expression I'd seen in my kitchen 3 days ago. They closed the case, Luther continued. Insufficient evidence, but look at this. He slid another document across the desk. Probate records. Roland Whitmore's will had been amended 3 weeks before his death, leaving his entire estate to Leonie. $8 million in property and investments. 3 weeks, I said. Yeah. His daughters challenged the will, claimed undue influence, but Leonie had documentation. Medical records showing Roland was of sound mind. Witnesses who testified he was happy in love, making plans for the future. The daughters lost. Luther pulled out a handwritten report, pages yellowed at the edges. Detective Marcus Flynn of Charleston PD had written the investigative notes that would go unheeded, detailed suspicions about a beneficiary who knew too much and cried too little. Read this, Luther said. I picked up the report. Flynn's handwriting was careful, precise. The kind of notes a cop writes when he knows something's wrong but can't prove it. Beneficiary acted unusually calm at scene. No tears at funeral. When questioned about estate, showed detailed knowledge of deceased's assets prior to death, including accounts and property holdings not commonly discussed between spouses of such brief duration. Subject's answers were rehearsed, consistent to the point of memorization. Recommends psychological evaluation and further investigation into timeline of relationship. They never followed up, Luther said. Flynn retired 6 months later. Case went cold. I set down the report and picked up the next document. A psychological profile compiled by an independent investigator hired by Roland's daughters during the probate fight. Subject demonstrates pattern of calculated relationship building with high net worth targets. I read aloud. Recommend further investigation. But they never did, Luther finished. The daughters ran out of money to fight. Leonie got everything, moved to Savannah 2 years later, and married your son. I looked at the photographs spread across the desk. Roland and Leonie at the gala. Leonie in a black dress at the funeral, face composed, eyes dry. Roland's daughters standing outside the courthouse, grief and rage written across their faces. Some predators hunt for sport. Others hunt for survival. Leonie belonged to a third category, entirely the ones who hunted because they'd learned it was easier than working. The timeline, I said. Walk me through it. Luther pulled out a handwritten chart he'd made. Dates and events in careful columns. 2018, Leonie meets Roland at a charity event. She's working as an event coordinator. 6 months later, they're married. 2019, Roland amends his will. 3 weeks later, he has a fatal heart attack at home. Leonie is the only witness. Calls 911, performs CPR, does everything right. Paramedics arrive, he's already gone. Autopsy shows massive coronary event, no suspicious substances, no signs of violence, natural causes. Convenient timing, I said. Very. 2020 probate fight. Leonie wins. 2021. She moves to Savannah. Within 6 months, she's dating Silas. They marry 6 months after that. And now 3 years after Roland's death, she's in your kitchen asking you to sign bank authorization forms. I stood up, walked to Luther's window. His office overlooked Bay Street tourists walking past in the afternoon sun. Normal people doing normal things, unaware that 3 blocks away, a man was discovering he'd invited a killer into his family. Vernon, Luther said quietly, look at the pattern. Widowed man, wealthy, lonely, quick courtship, marriage, financial consolidation, and then death. I finished. Roland was 62 when he died. You're 68. The coroner ruled heart attack. You had a minor cardiac episode 2 years ago, remember? High blood pressure, stress-related. Your doctor put you on medication. I turned from the window. You think she's planning to kill me. I think she's done this before, Luther said. And I think you're following the exact same script Roland Whitmore followed. Widowed, vulnerable, wealthy. She probably knew your financial situation before Silas ever brought her to meet you. The file in my hands wasn't evidence of past crimes. It was a script, and I was reading the next performance. But there's a difference, I said. I'm not married to Leonie. Silas is Doubleday. Are you listed as beneficiary on anything Silas owns? I thought about it. His life insurance policy, he asked me to co-sign it 3 years ago, said it would save him money on premiums. I'm the secondary beneficiary after Leonie. Luther closed his eyes. Jesus, Vernon. What? If something happens to Silas, Leonie inherits. If something happens to you, Silas inherits. Either way, the money flows to her eventually. She doesn't need to marry you. She just needs to wait. I sat back down. The photographs of Roland Whitmore stared up at me. Kind eyes, gentle smile. A man who'd trusted the wrong person. The last man she did this to, I said slowly, isn't here to warn me because he's dead. Luther gathered the files, stacked them carefully. But you're not Roland Whitmore. You know what she is now, and you're not alone in this. He was right. Leonie had done this before. Every move she'd made with me, every gentle word, every concerned glance she'd rehearsed on Roland Whitmore. But Roland had been alone. Roland hadn't had Luther. Roland hadn't had Ruth's letter. Roland hadn't known to look for the predator until it was too late. She'd done this before. The last man wasn't here to warn me, but I wasn't the only one who'd been watching. 3 months after Luther showed me those Charleston files, I got a call from an unknown number late one evening, a man's voice careful and low. "Mr. Hayes, my name is Miguel Vargas. I live next door to you. I think we need to talk." Miguel Vargas was 52, a retired postal worker with steady hands and honest eyes. He'd lived next door for 11 years. We'd exchanged pleasantries over the fence, watched each other's houses during vacations, shared a bottle of wine at neighborhood gatherings. A quiet, reliable man, not someone given to dramatics. He came to my back door the following morning early before Silas or Leonie might drive past. "My daughter Paloma," he said, sitting at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a coffee cup. "She's 15. Sharp girl. Too sharp sometimes, sees things she shouldn't have to see." "What did she see?" I asked. 3 weeks ago she couldn't sleep, looked out her bedroom window around midnight. "She saw Silas and Leonie in your backyard." He paused. "They were going through your garden shed. Vernon had flashlights, spent 20 minutes in there. Leonie had a bag." I set down my coffee cup. "Paloma took photographs," Miguel continued, "on her phone. She didn't know what they were doing, but she knew it was wrong. Middle of the night, flashlights going through your property while you were asleep. She came to me the next morning." He slid his phone across the table. The photographs were grainy, taken through a window screen in low light, but clear enough. Silas and Leonie moving through my backyard, the shed door open. Leonie holding a bag, reaching inside with deliberate, practiced movements. "I've been sitting on this for 3 weeks, Miguel said. "Didn't know if I should say something, but then Paloma asked me, 'Papa, why would they go in Mr. Hayes' shed at night if they weren't doing something wrong?' And I didn't have an answer." I looked at the photographs again. The timestamps read 11:47 p.m. 3 weeks ago. I'd been asleep, same as always, while my son and his wife went through my property in the dark. "Does Paloma understand what she photographed?" I asked. "She's 15, Miguel said. "She understands more than I'd like her to." He folded his hands on the table. "Vernon, I've known you 11 years. You're a good man. Whatever is happening in your family, I thought you should know." I thanked him, walked him to the door, stood there after he left photographs still on my kitchen table. They'd been in my shed at midnight. I didn't know yet what they'd taken, what they'd planted, what they'd planned. But the photographs were time-stamped, geotagged, and in the hands of a 15-year-old girl who'd had the presence of mind to document what she saw. 1 month later, I sat in Naomi Brennan's office and learned what Ruth had really left me. Naomi Brennan was 51 and formidable in her corner office overlooking Bull Street. She'd been Ruth's attorney and friend for 30 years, and she'd been waiting for this meeting since the day Ruth died. "Your wife was brilliant," Naomi said, sliding a thick folder across her mahogany desk. She saw something most people never see until it's too late. Inside the folder was the complete trust document, page after page of legal protections, firewalls, stipulations. "Ruth set up this trust 8 years before she died," Naomi explained. $3.1 million, completely untouchable. Irrevocable trust protected from creditors, lawsuits, bankruptcy, divorce, probate. She was very specific about the protections. I stared at the numbers. Ruth had set this up when Silas was 25. Before Leonie, before the gambling, before any of this nightmare began. "How did she know?" I asked. "She didn't know the specifics," Naomi said, "but she knew you'd be vulnerable after she was gone. She knew people would see a widower with money and make assumptions, so she protected you." At the back of the folder in Ruth's handwriting was a letter I hadn't seen before, an addendum to the one I'd found in my study. "The assets in the trust will not be touched by anyone. The rest, approximately $1.1 million in accessible accounts and property, Use it as bait if needed. Make them show you who they are. Make them reach for what isn't theirs. And when they do, you'll have your proof. So I have 3 million they can't touch, I said slowly, and 1 million I can use to trap them. Naomi nodded. Ruth turned you from prey into predator. She just needed you to realize it. My wife had been dead for 8 years, but she was still protecting me, still fighting for me from beyond the grave. She'd seen my vulnerability and built me armor. She'd anticipated my enemies and forged me a weapon. The trust, I said. If something happens to me, it goes to your granddaughter, Naomi said. Silas gets nothing, Leonie gets nothing. The money stays protected until your granddaughter turns 30. Even if they get you to sign every other document in the world, they can't touch this. Ruth had left me not just a warning, but a weapon. Now I needed Silas and Leonie to reach for it. I waited for Silas to make his move. What I didn't expect was that while I was watching him, Leonie was making hers. And her method wasn't financial. It was lethal. I caught the movement in the refrigerator door's reflection. Leonie's hand slipping something small and deliberate into my coffee cup. Her back still turned, humming softly as if this were just another Wednesday morning. May 2022, 8 months before the arrest. The kitchen smelled like vanilla creamer and the jasmine blooming outside the window. Leonie had offered to make my morning coffee, said I'd been working so hard on those old tax files, should let her help. I'd agreed because that's what we did now. Performed normalcy, pretended trust. But I'd learned to watch reflections. The refrigerator door showed everything the naked eye would miss, her hand reaching into her pocket. The small glass vial, no bigger than my thumb. The quick twist of the cap. The careful pour into my cup, 1, 2, 3 drops, precise as a pharmacist. The way she stirred it in the spoon, making soft circles against ceramic. The way she wiped the vial on a tissue and slipped it back into her pocket. All of it reflected in stainless steel while she hummed something I didn't recognize. She turned with the cup in both hands, smiling. Here you go. I added a touch of cinnamon the way Ruth used to make it. Invoking my dead wife's name while handing me poison. That took skill. Thank you, I said, taking the cup. It was warm against my palms. Steam rose in lazy spirals. You didn't have to go to the trouble. No trouble at all, she said, touching my shoulder as she passed. I have to run to the store. Need anything? I'm good. Be back in an hour. I listened to her footsteps cross the living room, the front door opening, her car starting in the driveway, the sound of gravel as she pulled away. Only then did I move. I set the cup on the counter and stared at it. Steam still rising. Cinnamon scent mixing with coffee and something else. Something chemical underneath, faint as an aftertaste. My hands were shaking. I opened the cabinet under the sink and pulled out a glass jar, the kind Ruth used for canning preserves. Unscrewed the lid, carefully poured the coffee in every drop, watching it slosh brown and innocent against the glass. Sealed it, labeled it with the date and time in black marker. Then I scooped the used grounds from the filter, still damp and fragrant, into a plastic baggie. Sealed that too. I texted Luther, sample ready, bring chain of custody paperwork. Don't come to the house. His reply came in seconds. Park on Whitaker in 20. I washed the coffee cup, dried it, put it back in the cabinet, exactly where it belonged, made a fresh pot of coffee and poured myself a clean cup. Sat at the kitchen table with the morning paper like nothing had changed. I was living under the same roof as a woman who was trying to kill me, and I was going to let her think she was succeeding. When Leonie came home an hour later, I was in my study going through paperwork. She appeared in the doorway with grocery bags. Was the coffee good? She asked. I looked up, smiled. Perfect as always. I'm so glad. She stepped closer, studying my face. You look tired, Vernon. Are you feeling okay? Just working on these tax documents. They're giving me a headache. You should rest, she said. Take a nap. I'll make lunch later. That sounds nice, I said. She lingered in the doorway another moment, watching me. I kept my expression neutral, slightly weary, exactly what she expected to see. Finally, she smiled and left. I sat very still, listening to her put away groceries. Cabinets opening and closing, the refrigerator door. Normal sounds, domestic sounds. Sounds that would continue until one of us stopped playing this game. Luther called 2 days later. His voice was flat, professional. The voice he used when evidence came back worse than expected. Digoxin, he said. High dose. Comes from foxglove plants. In high concentrations, it causes cardiac arrest. Looks natural, especially in someone your age with a history of high blood pressure. How many doses? To kill you. One this strong could do it, but more likely she's building it up slowly. Multiple small doses over weeks. Weakens the heart gradually. When you finally have the attack, no one questions it. The 68-year-old widower with stress and high blood pressure, of course his heart gave out. I was sitting in my car in the Publix parking lot. Through the windshield, I could see families loading groceries, children in shopping carts, normal people living normal lives. How long? I asked. At this dose, if she's been doing this regularly, you'd start feeling symptoms in a few weeks. Fatigue, confusion, irregular heartbeat, symptoms everyone would attribute to aging and stress. And then one morning, you wouldn't wake up. The conspiracy had evolved, from theft to fraud to murder, and I was the only one who knew I was supposed to be dead. Can you test my blood? I asked. See if it's already in my system. I'll set it up, discreetly. But Vernon, if she's trying this, she's not planning to wait for Silas's financial schemes. She's going for the faster route. Roland Whitmore, I said. Exactly, same pattern. Widowed man, convenient heart attack, big inheritance. She's following her own playbook. I drove home slowly under the speed limit, hands steady on the wheel. When I pulled into the driveway, Leonie was in the kitchen making dinner. I could smell garlic and tomatoes through the open window. She met me at the door, wooden spoon in hand, smiling. Perfect timing, she said. Dinner's almost ready, and I made fresh coffee for after. That sounds wonderful, I said. She smiled when she handed me the cup later that evening. I smiled back. Neither of us was being honest. We were two actors in a play where only one of us knew all the lines and the other one was writing my death scene. The performance continued for 3 weeks. Leonie made coffee. I pretended to drink it. She smiled. I smiled back. And every cup went down the drain after she left the room, every sample collected in Luther's evidence chain. But poison was just one strategy. The call from Keith Ramsey came on a Tuesday morning, his voice tight with professional alarm. Vernon, I need to tell you about a conversation I just had, he said. Someone claiming to be your physician called the bank. Keith Ramsey was 45 and detail-obsessed after 20 years in banking. He'd learned to trust his instincts, and every instinct told him something was wrong with that call. What did they say? I asked. He introduced himself as Dr. Harrison Caldwell, said he was your treating physician. Told me you're being treated for mild cognitive impairment and might need assistance with financial transactions. Suggested we flag your account for additional verification on large withdrawals. I sat down at my kitchen table. Keith, I don't have a physician named Harrison Caldwell. I haven't been to a doctor in 6 months. That's what I thought, Keith said. The whole conversation felt wrong. Too smooth, too rehearsed. I told him I'd need to verify everything with you directly before making any account changes. He didn't like that. Got pushy. Said he was trying to protect you from making financial mistakes due to your condition. What condition? That's exactly what I asked. He got vague. Just kept saying mild cognitive impairment, normal for your age, nothing to be alarmed about, but important to have safeguards. Vernon, I documented everything. Time of call, exact words, the callback number he left. That number doesn't even exist. I tried it twice. They weren't just stealing my money. They were stealing my mind, or trying to, at least on paper. A phantom doctor diagnosing a phantom disease to create a very real guardianship. Keith, I need you to keep documenting, I said. Every call, every contact, every detail. Can you do that? Already started. And Vernon, I've been doing this 20 years. I know what financial elder abuse looks like. Someone's building a paper trail to take control of your accounts. The cognitive impairment claim, the physician verification, the suggestion of guardian assistance, it's textbook. Thank you for calling, I said. And Keith, trust your instincts. They're right. I hung up and immediately called Luther. They're escalating. Fake doctor, fake diagnosis, trying to get the bank to flag me as incompetent. Legal strategy, Luther said. If they can get enough people on record saying you're declining bank managers, fake doctors, maybe some strategically timed confused moments in public, they build a case for guardianship. Then Silas gets legal control of everything. Except Ruth's trust. Except that. But they don't know about the trust. They think it's all accessible. And if they get guardianship, they'd have access to the bait you left out. The land, I said. Exactly. 180,000 in that plot. You left it out of the trust deliberately. When are they going to reach for it? 1 month later, Luther called with the answer. He's here, Luther said, his voice coming through my phone speaker sharp with focus. Coastal Notary on Abercorn. Your son is selling your land right now. I was in my study. Through the window, I could see Leonie in the garden, pruning roses. Normal Tuesday afternoon. Except my son was 3 miles away, committing felony theft. Get every second of it, I said. Every signature, every document. I want proof he knew exactly what he was doing. I'm across the street in my car, Luther said. Telephoto lens. I can see him through the window, clear as day. He's at a table with the notary and what looks like the buyer's representative. Documents spread out everywhere. Can you see him signing? Watching it right now. He just signed the first page. Your name, Vernon Hayes, in handwriting that's trying to look like yours. He's not even nervous. Wait, second page. Same thing. He's done this before, Vernon. This isn't his first time forging your signature. I gripped the phone. Every crime they committed was another nail in their coffin. I wasn't gathering evidence. I was building their prison, one felony at a time. How much longer? I asked. 10 more pages, maybe. Notary's checking everything, comparing signatures. Now she's pulling out her stamp. Official notary seal going on each page, making it all legal, or trying to. Through my window, Leonie moved to the next rosebush, secateurs flashing in the afternoon sun. She looked up once toward the house, smiled when she saw me in the window. I waved, she waved back. Normal life, normal afternoon, except nothing was normal anymore. He's standing up, Luther said, shaking hands with the buyer's rep, documents going into a folder. Money must have already transferred. He's leaving. Follow him. No need. I got what we came for. Clear photographs of your son selling property he doesn't own, using a signature that isn't his. Grand theft forgery fraud. Pick your felony. How clear are the photos? Clear enough to read the document headers. Clear enough to see his face. Clear enough to see he didn't hesitate once when he signed your name. This wasn't a mistake, Vernon. This was practiced. Confident. He's done this before. I thought about the 45,000 5 years ago. The ATM withdrawal. How many other transactions had there been? How many other times had Silas signed my name to documents I'd never seen? Send everything to Naomi, I said. Encrypted, chain of custody documentation. I want this evidence bulletproof. Already done, Luther said. Vernon, you understand what this means. The land was bait, but he took it. He committed a felony on camera. We've got him. Not yet, I said. Not until I'm ready to spring the trap. But the trap was working. Silas had reached for exactly what I'd left exposed. $180,000 in forged signatures and fraudulent sale documents, all captured on Luther's camera. He'd just handed me everything I needed to destroy him. I had the forgery evidence. I had the poison samples. I had Luther's photographs and Keith's documentation. But the evidence that would matter most came from a source I never expected, a 15-year-old girl who couldn't sleep. Paloma Vargas couldn't sleep that Saturday night, and when she looked through her bedroom window at 11:30, she saw Silas Hayes climbing over her neighbor's fence like a thief, which she would later realize was exactly what he was. I didn't know about Paloma's vigil until the next morning, when Luther showed up at my door with his phone in his hand and a look on his face I'd never seen before. You need to see this, he said. The photographs were grainy, taken through a window screen in low light, but clear enough. Silas climbing my back fence. Leonie waiting behind the shed, her white dress ghostly in the darkness. The two of them moving with the practiced ease of people who had done this before, turning toward my darkened bedroom window, checking to make sure I was still asleep. Paloma Vargas was 15 and sharp-eyed, and she'd looked through her bedroom window that Saturday night and understood immediately that what she was seeing mattered. Some things don't need explanation, even to a teenager. Miguel's daughter, Luther said. She knows who you are, knows Silas is your son. When she saw him climbing the fence at 11:30 at night, she knew something was wrong. She texted her father. Smart kid, sent the photos and asked if she should call someone. Miguel called me at midnight. Vernon, she took 27 pictures, time-stamped, geotagged, every one of them showing your son and his wife going through your property while you slept. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where Leonie had served me poisoned coffee, where Silas had spread those bank authorization forms, where I'd eaten 1,000 meals with Ruth, never imagining I'd one day be looking at photographic evidence of my son's betrayal taken by a child. Can we use this? I asked. In court, absolutely. Vernon, what this proves is premeditation. They're not just co-conspirators in a financial scheme. They were in your backyard in the middle of the night, together working in silence. Everything they've done, the poison, the forgery, the fake doctor, it's coordinated, calculated. Two people who trust each other completely because they're guilty of everything together. A 15-year-old girl with a smartphone had captured what months of investigation couldn't. The kind of evidence that showed exactly who Silas and Leonie were when they thought no one was watching. Does Miguel know what he's getting his daughter into? I asked. He knows. And Paloma knows. She wants to help. Said Mr. Hayes was always kind to her. Gave her candy at Halloween, asked about her school. Said she knows evil when she sees it, and what she saw Saturday night was evil, out of the mouths of teenagers. 1 month later, Naomi called with news that made Paloma's photographs suddenly critical. Vernon Silas just filed for voluntary guardianship, she said, her voice tight with urgency. He's attached medical records claiming you need assistance with all financial decisions. I was in my study when she called. Through the window, I could see autumn leaves starting to turn. September in Savannah, still warm, but with a hint of change coming. Medical records from the fake doctor? I asked. Worse. 2 witnesses. I've never heard of a Helen Morrison and a Robert Bradford claiming they've observed your decline over the past 6 months. Confusion, memory lapses, inappropriate financial decisions. The hearing is in 18 days. Who are they? I have no idea. I'm running background checks now. But Vernon, they've filed sworn affidavits. Detailed observations, times, dates, specific incidents. It's all fabricated, but it's professionally done. Someone coached them. I stood up and walked to the window. Leonie was in the driveway loading groceries from her car. Normal Saturday afternoon, shopping, cooking, the rhythm of domestic life. Except she was planning to steal my mind. What happens if the judge grants it? I asked. If that judge grants this petition, Silas gets legal authority over everything. Bank accounts, property sales, medical decisions, everything. And Vernon, even the trust becomes vulnerable through contested guardianship. If Silas can prove you were incompetent when Ruth set it up, he can challenge the entire structure. 18 days to prove I wasn't losing my mind. 18 days before they could legally undo everything Ruth had spent 8 years protecting. What do we need? I asked. Counter evidence. Recent medical evaluation from a real doctor. Witnesses who can testify to your competence. Financial records showing sound decision-making. Character witnesses. And Vernon, we need to be ready to expose who these fake witnesses really are and why they're lying. I can get medical evaluation within a week. Do it. Complete cognitive assessment. I want documentation that you're sharper than half the people on that courthouse bench. And I'm deposing these witnesses. If they're lying, I'll break them. Through the window, Leonie looked up and waved. I waved back. Smiled. She smiled. The performance continued. What about Paloma's photographs? I asked. Those establish premeditation. Silas and Leonie in your backyard at midnight proves this financial exploitation isn't about concern for your welfare. It's about 2 people working in concert to take everything you have. But Vernon, using a 15-year-old as a witness, we have to be careful. Her parents have to consent. She'll be cross-examined. Are you comfortable putting her through that? No, I said, but I don't think we'll have a choice. Then I'll talk to Miguel. Get everything documented properly. Chain of custody on those photographs. Sworn statement from Paloma about what she witnessed. But the hearing is in 18 days, and we're playing defense against a guardianship petition backed by fake medical records and perjured testimony. We have 18 days to dismantle their case, I said. We have 18 days to prove you're competent, Naomi corrected. That's all that matters. Everything else, the theft, the fraud, the conspiracy, we can prosecute later. But if you lose this hearing, you lose control of everything. I hung up and sat in my study as afternoon turned to evening. The deadline was real. The stakes were maximum, and the clock was already ticking. 18 days. That's all I had to prove I was still the man Ruth married. While I was racing against that 18-day deadline gathering, medical evaluations and witness statements, something happened that I wouldn't learn about until weeks later. Something that would change the entire game. Miguel told me about it eventually after everything was over. He'd been trimming his hedges that October afternoon when he heard voices carrying over the fence from my driveway. Not arguing, just talking. low and deliberate, the way people talk when they think no one can hear. Silas had left his car window down, phone on speaker, talking to his private lawyer, while Leonie stood beside him, going through a folder of documents. Miguel had gone still behind his hedges and listened. When everything is done, I need to remove Leonie from all documents. She knows too much. Make sure her name doesn't appear currently in any agreement. The old man won't last long anyway. Once he's gone, I need a clean exit strategy that doesn't include her. Silas had said it casually, like he was discussing a grocery list. Clinical. Efficient. The same tone he probably used when planning how to forge my signature. Miguel said Leonie's hands went still on the folder. She didn't react. Didn't flinch. Just stood there perfectly composed, listening to the evidence of her own planned erasure. Finally, she closed the folder, carefully tucked it under her arm, and walked inside without a word. I imagined she understood perfectly in that moment. She'd planned to betray a good man. She'd never planned to be betrayed herself. Welcome to the game, Leonie. Welcome to being the mark instead of the player. The predator had been betrayed by her own accomplice. And while I didn't know it yet, that shift would eventually change everything. But I wasn't waiting for Leonie to change sides. I was building a trap that would work whether she helped me or not. 2 weeks after Leonie heard that phone call, I met Keith Ramsey in his private office after banking hours. The main branch was closed, lights dim except for Keith's corner office overlooking Bay Street. This has to be completely invisible, I said. To Silas, it needs to look like just another account. Keith pulled up account settings on his computer. The flag is invisible in the system. To Silas, it'll look like a normal savings account with $25,000. But the moment he touches it, withdrawal transfer, anything Detective Pierce gets an automated alert. How fast? 3 minutes. Every transaction, every single dollar gets recorded and sent to Pierce within 3 minutes. Vernon, this isn't a trap. It's a cage that locks the moment he reaches inside. I watched Keith's fingers move across the keyboard, setting up the account parameters. He'd been doing this for 20 years, and I'd never seen him so focused. The challenge, Keith continued, is making him want it without being obvious. If you just tell him about a new account, he'll be suspicious. But if you mention it casually, seem slightly worried about managing it, let him think he's discovering an opportunity. Then his greed does the rest, I finished. Exactly. Tell him it is from a recent investment return. Act like you're not sure what to do with it. Maybe mention you're thinking about moving it to a different bank because Wells Fargo's fees are too high. Give him a reason to act quickly. Keith printed out the account documentation and slid it across his desk. Official savings account, completely legal, completely functional. You can make deposits, withdrawals, everything normal. But that flag attached to it, that's between you, me, and Detective Pierce. What if Silas just takes a little at first, tests it? Doesn't matter. $1 or all 25,000, the alert triggers the same way. Every transaction is evidence. Every withdrawal is a confession. I picked up the papers. Account number, routing number, my name on the signature card. Everything looked normal, innocent, accessible. The beauty of this, Keith said, is that he can't help himself. You're going to dangle $25,000 in front of a man who's already stolen from you multiple times and gotten away with it. He's going to see it as easy money. One more account dear old dad doesn't monitor carefully. One more opportunity to skim off the top. The bait was set. The trap was armed. Now, I just needed my son to be exactly who I'd raised him not to be. Greedy, entitled, and absolutely certain he'd get away with it. How do we explain the flag if this goes to trial? I asked. Standard fraud monitoring, Keith said. After the fake doctor incident and the guardianship filing, I implemented enhanced security protocols on your accounts. Completely legitimate. Any competent banker would do the same when they suspect financial exploitation. The fact that these protocols happen to send alerts directly to law enforcement, that's just good risk management. When do I mention it to Silas? Soon, before the guardianship hearing. Give him time to act, but not time to think too carefully. A week, maybe 2. Casual conversation, slight concern in your voice. You're the confused elderly father who doesn't quite understand all these accounts. He's the helpful son who knows exactly how to manage them. I stood up, shook Keith's hand. Thank you for this. Vernon, I've been in banking 20 years. I've seen elder financial abuse more times than I can count. Usually the family doesn't realize what's happening until everything's gone. You're fighting back. You're building evidence. You're going to win. I walked out into the October evening. The air was cool autumn, finally settling into Savannah. Across the street, tourists walked past gallery windows, couples holding hands, normal people living normal lives. I had an 18-day deadline approaching, a guardianship hearing that could strip away my autonomy, a son and daughter-in-law actively trying to either poison me or declare me incompetent, and now a perfectly baited trap sitting in a Wells Fargo account, waiting. Every dollar in that account was a hook. I just needed Silas to reach for the line. I didn't have to wait long to see if Silas would take the bait. But what I didn't know was that while I was setting my trap, someone else had been setting theirs for months. Miguel's hands were still damp from washing his car when he heard Silas's voice drift over the fence from my driveway, casual and confident, phone on speaker, while Leonie stood beside him sorting through documents. Without thinking, Miguel reached for his own phone and pressed record. This was early November, 2 months before the arrest. I was still preparing my medical evaluations for the guardianship hearing, still building my case piece by piece. Silas stood in my driveway, phone to his ear, door half closed, but not quite shut. Miguel told me later that he'd been doing this for weeks. Every conversation that carried over the fence, every exchange he thought was private. His phone in his pocket record button pressed evidence, accumulating one conversation at a time. The old man is about to sign, Silas said, his voice carrying with that particular tone of triumph. Keith said the new account has $25K. That's a test. If he doesn't react, we'll transfer the rest this week. Leonie stood beside him, flipping through the folder, not saying a word. No, the guardianship hearing is in 3 weeks, Silas continued. Even if he tries to fight it, we'll have the money moved by then. Once it's in the offshore account, it doesn't matter what he proves about his competence. Miguel stopped the recording. Called Luther that same night. Luther called me. I got that message while sitting in my study. The audio file played through my headphones, Silas's voice clear and damning. Every word was a confession. Every sentence was another nail. Silas thought he was one step ahead of an old man. He didn't know his own neighbor had been listening. 3 weeks later, Luther called me at sunset. I was in my kitchen making coffee, watching the sky turn orange through the window. Detective Flynn in Charleston came through, Luther said without preamble. The psychological profile on Leonie from the Whitmore investigation. Vernon, this is damning. Can we use it? In court? Probably. It wasn't sufficient for criminal charges in Charleston, but it establishes a behavioral pattern. Judge will allow it as evidence of modus operandi. Read it to me. I heard papers rustling. Luther cleared his throat. Subject demonstrates pattern of calculated relationship building with high net worth targets. Approach is methodical, patient, and demonstrates learning from previous attempts. Initial contact appears organic, but subsequent investigation reveals extensive pre-relationship research into target's financial status, family structure, and psychological vulnerabilities. Subject adapts strategy based on target's specific circumstances, suggesting sophisticated understanding of manipulation techniques and iterative learning from previous encounters. Luther paused. Vernon, do you understand what this means? Learning from previous attempts, I said slowly. She didn't just do this before, she got better at it. Roland Whitmore was practice. I'm the performance. Exactly. The profile goes on. Want to hear the rest? All of it. Recommended intervention, immediate psychiatric evaluation, and ongoing monitoring. Subject's ability to compartmentalize emotional manipulation from genuine affect suggests personality disorder requiring professional assessment. Risk level for future similar behavior, high. Subject demonstrates no remorse or recognition of harm caused, instead viewing relationships transactionally. I set down my coffee cup. Through the window, the sunset had deepened to crimson. Flynn couldn't use this to charge her, I asked. Whitmore's death was ruled natural causes. Heart attack, no evidence of foul play. The profile was compiled during the probate fight, but the daughters ran out of money before they could push for exhumation or deeper investigation. Flynn kept the file because he knew Leonie would do it again. He just didn't know where or when. Until now. And Vernon, there's more. Flynn found a notation in his case file. 3 months before Roland Whitmore died, a neighbor reported seeing a different man visiting the house regularly when Whitmore was at work. The neighbor couldn't identify him, but the description matches someone in his 30s, fit dark hair. Silas, I said. Probably. They've been working together longer than we thought. This wasn't Leonie meeting your son and recruiting him. This was a partnership from the beginning. She'd practiced on Roland Whitmore, learned what worked, discarded what didn't, refined her approach until it was nearly perfect. And now she was better than she'd ever been. Can you send me the full profile? I asked. Already did. Check your encrypted email. Vernon, this proves she's a professional. Not just a gold digger. Not just a con artist. A predator who learns, adapts, and improves with each victim. I hung up and opened the email. The Charleston Police Department letterhead. Detective Marcus Flynn's signature. Page after page of psychological analysis, behavioral patterns, risk assessments. Every mistake she'd made with Roland Whitmore she'd corrected with me. Every technique she'd tested in Charleston she'd perfected in Savannah. She'd done this before, and she was better at it now than she'd ever been. She was better at this than she'd ever been. But being good at manipulation doesn't help when you're walking into a trap you can't see, and the trap I'd built was about to spring shut. The candlelight gleamed off expensive wine glasses at the old pink house, and for the first time in 2 years, my son was buying me dinner, which meant he wanted something, or thought he'd already won it. Dad, you're looking at the new senior portfolio manager at Hartwell Investments, Silas said, raising his glass. 40% salary increase plus performance bonuses. Leonie touched his arm, smiling. We wanted to celebrate with you. It's been such a good year. The restaurant was packed with Friday evening diners. Historic building candlelit tables, the smell of shrimp and grits mixing with old money and new success. Silas had ordered the most expensive bottle on the wine list, celebrating. That's wonderful news, I said. You've worked hard for this. I learned from the best, Silas said. You taught me everything about discipline and planning. I wondered if he could hear the irony. I'd taught him discipline. He'd learned to use it for theft. Speaking of finances, I said, keeping my voice casual, uncertain, playing the confused elderly father perfectly. I got some unexpected news this week. Recent investment return came through, $25,000. It's sitting in basic savings, and it makes me nervous having that much just sitting around. I watched them both. Silas set down his wine glass carefully. Leonie's hand stilled on her napkin. $25,000, Silas said. Dad, you really can't leave that kind of money in basic savings. The interest rate is terrible, and you're losing value to inflation. I know, I said, waving my hand. But Keith at the bank said something about investment accounts and different tiers, and honestly, it all went over my head. I thought maybe I should just leave it alone. That's when I saw it. The glance between Silas and Leonie. Less than 1 second. Most people would have missed it, but I'd been watching for it, waiting for exactly that moment of perfect coordination. They didn't just look at each other. They communicated. An entire conversation in a fraction of a second. Agreement, timing, strategy. This was what two conspirators looked like. People who'd rehearsed this scene, planned this moment, knew exactly what the other was thinking. He thought he was accepting an invitation to help his father manage money. He was accepting an invitation to commit felony theft on camera. Dad, let me help you, Silas said, leaning forward with that concerned son expression he'd perfected. This is exactly what I do professionally. We could go to the bank tomorrow morning. I'll make sure everything's set up properly. You won't have to worry about a thing. Tomorrow's Saturday, I said. Keith opens his office for preferred clients on Saturday mornings, Silas said smoothly. I'll call him tonight, set it up. Dad, seriously, you can't leave that money sitting in basic savings. Let me take care of this for you. Leonie nodded. It really would be better, Vernon. Silas manages portfolios worth millions. $25,000 is nothing for him to handle. Nothing. That word hung in the air. To them, stealing from me was nothing. A rounding error in their larger plan. Well, I said, looking relieved. Grateful. Exactly what they expected to see. If you're sure it's not too much trouble, I'd appreciate the help. No trouble at all, Silas said. That's what family is for. He raised his glass again. We toasted. The wine was excellent. Probably cost more than the coffee Leonie had been poisoning for months. Dinner lasted another hour. Silas told stories about his promotion, his new responsibilities, his plans for the future. Every word was performance. Every smile was calculation. And I sat there playing my role perfectly. The proud father who didn't quite understand modern finance, grateful his son was willing to help. When we left the restaurant, Silas hugged me. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock at the bank. I'll take care of everything, Dad. Thank you, son, I said. I drove home alone, watching my rearview mirror. Silas and Leone got into his car, probably already planning how to spend money they thought they were about to steal. Before I show you what happened at Wells Fargo the next morning, comment A or B, would you have gone through with it or walked away? Add your reason in 5 words. Please note what follows includes some recreated details for storytelling. The message is what I hope stays with you. Saturday morning, 9 o'clock. Keith's private office at Wells Fargo. Silas arrived early, Gairiker. I came in exactly on time, playing the slightly confused elderly man who needed help. Mr. Hayes, Keith said with his professional banker smile, Silas explained you'd like to set up proper management for your recent investment return. If it's not too complicated, I said. I don't want to take up too much of your Saturday. Not at all, Keith said. I'll need you to sign here authorizing Silas as financial manager for this account. I picked up the pen, hesitated, looked at Silas. Are you sure about this, son? It seems like a lot of responsibility. Dad, I do this every day, Silas said. Trust me. I signed. Keith witnessed. The bank cameras recorded every moment. Silas sat down at Keith's computer, fingers moving across the keyboard with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. Because he had, multiple times. Different accounts, always my signature, always my money. I'll move this into my account temporarily for the investment setup, Silas said to Keith. My father authorized this obviously since we're here together. Of course, Cognitive said. His poker face was perfect, professional, helpful, giving no indication that the moment Silas hit that transfer button, an automated alert would ping Detective Desmond Pierce's phone with complete transaction details and camera footage. Silas transferred all $25,000. Took him maybe 3 minutes. Efficient, practiced, no hesitation. Transaction complete, Keith said. You should see the transfer reflected within the hour. Silas stood up, shook Keith's hand, and put his arm around my shoulders. See, Dad, easy. I'll have this properly invested by Monday. Much better returns than basic savings. Thank you for taking care of this, I said. We walked out together. Silas's step was light, confident. He'd just stolen $25,000 and he thought he'd gotten away with it. 11 minutes to commit a felony. 6 months to build the cage. 3 minutes for the police to be notified. The math was simple, brutal, and perfect. Detective Pierce had the transaction records, the camera footage, Keith's witness statement, every piece of evidence needed for arrest. $25,000, 11 minutes to steal, 6 months to set the trap. The trap had worked perfectly. Silas thought he'd gotten away with it. What I didn't know until later was that the same night he stole that money, something shifted. The predator finally realized he was being hunted. Miguel told me about it weeks later after everything was over. He'd been awake that night, sitting on his back porch with a glass of iced tea, when he heard Silas's voice, carrying through the open window of my study. Silas had come back to the house after dinner, let himself in with his spare key. Miguel heard him pacing, heard the tension in every word. He told himself it was just a routine check. He always checked the accounts late at night, when Leonie thought he was reviewing work files. Made sure the transfers were clean, the paper trail invisible. But this time, something was different. The account in Leonie's name, the one they'd been using for the offshore staging. Clean account, careful routing, everything designed to be untraceable, except it wasn't clean anymore. Suspicious activity marker, he'd said to himself, his voice carrying through the window. Account flagged for review. What the hell? Miguel said he could hear papers shuffling, hear Silas clicking through details. The flags were dated 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. Someone had been watching this account for 3 weeks, and he was only noticing now. Someone was tracking his activities, monitoring accounts he thought were hidden. He grabbed his phone, punched in a number. 1 in the morning, and he was calling Leonie. We have a problem, he said when she answered. No greeting, just panic barely controlled. What do you mean flagged? Leonie's voice carried through the phone, sharp even at that hour. Who would know about that account? I don't know, Silas said. But someone's been watching it for 3 weeks. Since right after I set up the management authorization with Dad. Miguel sat very still on his porch phone, already in hand, recording every word. It has to be Keith, Silas said. The bank manager. He must have noticed something when I transferred the money. Maybe he flagged it as suspicious because of Dad's age elder protection protocols or something. Or maybe it's not Keith, Leonie said. What if someone else knows? Who else would know? Dad doesn't understand any of this. Luther's retired. It has to be Keith. The hunter had just realized he was being hunted, but he was looking in the wrong direction, and that mistake would cost him everything. I'll go to the bank tomorrow, Silas said. Talk to Keith. Convince him there's nothing suspicious here. The transfer was authorized. Dad was right there when I did it. I'll make him remove the flags. What if he won't? He will, Silas said. His voice had that edge Miguel recognized from months of listening over the fence. Desperation masked as confidence. I'll make it clear that continued flagging could be seen as harassment of a valued client. Imply legal action if needed. Keith's a banker. He'll back down. You're sure about this? I don't have a choice, Silas said. If those flags stay active, they trigger automatic reviews. Reviews mean auditors. Auditors mean questions about why I'm moving my father's money into accounts with your name on them. We need those flags gone. He hung up, went quiet. Miguel stopped the recording, texted Luther. Luther called me at 2 a.m. For the first time in 18 months, Silas Hayes was afraid. And fear makes smart people do stupid things, like walking straight into a trap while thinking they're escaping it. He didn't know that Keith had put those flags there deliberately. Didn't know they were designed to be discovered. Didn't know that his decision to confront Keith was exactly what I'd been waiting for. Every defensive move he made was driving him deeper into the cage. The next morning, Miguel sent me a text. He found the flags, planning to pressure Keith today. Audio file attached. I replied, thank you. Everything's going exactly as planned. Because it was. Silas discovering those flags wasn't an accident. Keith had timed their visibility perfectly 3 weeks after the transfer, just long enough for Silas to think he'd gotten away with it, just visible enough to trigger exactly this panic. And Silas's response. Textbook. Predictable. Exactly what someone guilty and scared would do. He was going to pressure Keith to remove evidence of his own crime. Going to threaten the one person who'd been documenting everything. Going to walk into Keith's office and create more evidence while trying to destroy the evidence that already existed. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the poison in my coffee, the forged signatures, the fake doctor, the guardianship petition designed to steal my mind, the 18 months of systematic theft and manipulation. Silas had spent 1.5 years hunting me. Now he'd finally realized someone was hunting him back. He just didn't know who. He thought the threat was Keith Ramsey at the bank. Some overzealous manager with compliance concerns, a problem that could be managed with the right pressure, the right threats, the right performance of innocent confusion. He was wrong. The threat was me, his father, the old man he'd been systematically robbing and trying to declare incompetent. The widower he thought was too confused to notice, too lonely to fight back, too trusting to see what his own son had become. And that miscalculation, that fundamental misunderstanding of who was setting the trap, was going to be his undoing. Miguel's text came through an hour later. He just left for the bank. He looks determined. Vernon, what's going to happen? I typed back, Justice, finally, because Keith wasn't going to remove those flags. Keith was going to document every word Silas said, every threat he made, every attempt to obstruct evidence. Keith had a body camera he'd been wearing for 2 weeks, installed after Detective Pierce suggested enhanced documentation. Silas thought he was going to intimidate a bank manager into hiding his crimes. He was actually going to record himself attempting to obstruct justice while confessing to theft. For the first time in 18 months, Silas was afraid. He just didn't know of whom. While Silas was panicking about bank flags and planning to pressure Keith, I was discovering truths that had been hiding in plain sight for months. Sometimes the most important evidence is the thing you've been carrying with you all along. The truth had been staring at me from my own study for 6 months. I just hadn't known what I was looking at. Luther came to my house on a cold December morning with a folder under his arm, and that expression I'd learned to read, the one that meant the evidence was worse than expected. He spread the contents across my kitchen table. Photographs, timestamps, phone records. Paloma found something, Luther said. She'd been going through the photographs she took of your backyard that night, zoomed in on one of them. Look at this. The photograph was grainy, but clear enough. Leonie standing behind the shed, a small bag in her hand. The bag was open, and in the magnified section Paloma had circled in red, just visible at the edge of the frame, was a glass vial. the same size and shape as the one I'd seen reflected in my refrigerator door. She wasn't just there for documents, Luther said. She was restocking. I stared at the photograph. The timeline crystallized. The shed visit at midnight. The coffee the next morning. She'd gone to the shed to retrieve what she needed, then used it the following day in my kitchen. Luther, I said slowly, how long has she been doing this? That's the question, isn't it? He pulled out another document. Blood work results. Pierce arranged the test discreetly 3 weeks ago. Vernon, the digoxin levels in your system, they're consistent with exposure over several months, not just once. Regularly. Several months. I'd been drinking that coffee every morning, trusting the woman who made it. The shed, I said. She was keeping the supply there, where Silas could access it too if needed. But Leonie was the one administering it. Methodical. Patient. The same way she handled Roland Whitmore. My hands started shaking. Not from fear. From the full weight of it finally landing, how close I'd come. How long it had been happening. How completely I'd been surrounded. Luther touched my arm. Steady. Grounding. Breathe, he said. We have it all documented now. The vial in the photograph. The blood work. The pattern matching Charleston. It's enough. I breathed. The world steadied. The photograph, I said. Paloma found this herself. She'd been studying every frame since the night she took them. Said something felt wrong about the bag Leonie was carrying, but she couldn't identify it until she zoomed in. Luther shook his head slowly. 15 years old, Vernon. She did what trained investigators missed. 4 days later, I sat in Luther's office while he spread phone records across his desk. I traced the calls to Miguel, Luther said. The ones warning him to keep watch on your property. The ones that started this whole chain. He slid a highlighted page toward me. Numbers, dates, call logs going back to spring. Anonymous tip line, Luther said, but the cell tower data puts the origin 2 blocks from Silas's office. Someone who knew your situation knew Miguel was your neighbor and wanted eyes on your property without getting involved directly. Who? I asked. Luther folded his hands. We don't know yet. Could be someone at Silas's firm who got nervous. Could be someone Leonie wronged before. Could be someone who saw the Charleston files and connected the dots. He paused. But Vernon, whoever it was, they started this. Without those calls to Miguel, Paloma never watches your backyard. Without Paloma, we never get the photographs. Without the photographs, we never get the vial. A stranger I'd never meet had set the first domino falling. 3 days later, Keith called me. You need to know what just happened, he said. I was in my kitchen. Put down my coffee. Listened. Silas just left my office. Came in unannounced, no appointment. Started talking about how concerned the family is about you. Said you're not yourself lately, making poor decisions, that I should stop flagging transactions because it's upsetting you. What did you say? I said I have legal obligations under elder protection protocols. That flags aren't personal judgments, they're compliance requirements. He didn't like that. What did he do? Pushed harder, said continued flagging could damage our professional relationship, implied there might be consequences for the bank if I didn't stop treating you like you're incompetent. Vernon, he was threatening me, politely, professionally, but threatening. I could hear Keith's keyboard clicking in the background. Are you okay? I asked. I'm fine. I stayed professional, ended the meeting. But Vernon, there's something else you should know. What? Detective Pierce visited me 3 days ago, installed a body camera, said to wear it anytime I'm meeting with anyone connected to your accounts. I was wearing it the entire time Silas was in my office. I set down my coffee cup very carefully. So you have video, I said, and audio. Every word, every threat, every implication that I should obstruct evidence to protect your son. Vernon, he walked into a trap. He came here to close down evidence against him, and instead he created more. Silas had thought he was being smart, proactive, shutting down the threat before it could grow. He'd identified Keith as the weak point and moved to neutralize him. He'd been wrong about everything. Keith wasn't the weak point. Keith was the witness, the documentarian, the man wearing a camera that had just recorded every word of Silas's attempted obstruction of justice. Send everything to Detective Pierce, I said. Already did, Keith said. Automatic upload. He has the footage within minutes of the meeting ending. I hung up and sat in my kitchen as winter afternoon light faded to evening. Silas's desperation was creating the evidence chain that would destroy him. Every move he made to protect himself was another piece of the cage. He came to close a door, Every word he said was opening another one. For me. Every door Silas tried to close was opening wider. Evidence accumulating. Witnesses recording. And then 3 days before Christmas, someone knocked on my door who would open the final one. The knock was so soft I almost didn't hear it. I was in my study going through Keith's email about the body camera footage. Detailed report. Every word Silas had said. Every threat he'd made. Every attempt to obstruct evidence. All recorded, all admissible. The knock came again. Soft. Deliberate. Not the confident rap of someone who belonged there. I opened the door. Leonie stood on my porch in the December cold, no coat arms wrapped around herself. But there was no softness in her eyes tonight. No performance. Just calculation, something colder underneath it. Silas is in Atlanta, she said. Business trip. I need to talk to you. I stepped aside. She walked past me into the living room, sat on the edge of Ruth's old chair, like she owned it. I know you know, she said. No preamble, no pretense. And I know Silas has Plan B. I sat across from her, waited. Plan B doesn't include me, she continued. I found the email, saw the instructions to his lawyer. When everything's done, I get erased, removed from all documentation, expendable. So you came here to what, confess? Negotiate, she said. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not pretending I'm innocent. But I don't want to be the one sacrificed when this collapses. She pulled a USB drive from her pocket, set it on the coffee table between us. Everything's on there, 18 months. Every message between me and Silas, every plan, every lie, every transaction. Do what you want with it. She wasn't asking forgiveness because she wasn't sorry. This was business, a deal, evidence for immunity. The predator cutting losses before the trap closed. I picked up the USB drive, small, black, 18 months of conspiracy compressed into something that fit in my palm. Why now? I asked. Because Silas is panicking, making mistakes, pressuring people, creating problems. And when this falls apart, and it will, I'm not going down as the only villain. He planned this as much as I did. More maybe. I was just better at the performance. She stood up, smoothed her dress. The gesture was automatic. Habit. Even now, even here, she was performing something. I'll cooperate, she said. Testimony documents, whatever you need. But I want it on record that I came forward, that I provided evidence, that I'm not the only one responsible for this. She walked to the door, stopped. I didn't expect it to be this complicated, she said. That made it harder, but not hard enough to stop. I want you to know that. I don't care, I said. She left. I watched her walk to her car, back straight, head high. She never looked back, never hesitated. She never once said sorry, because she wasn't. That night I sat in my study with the USB drive in my laptop. The files were organized, professional. Categories for financial transactions, personal messages, strategy documents. I started with the messages. 18 months of planning, every step mapped out. Meeting timelines, manipulation tactics, ways to isolate me, confuse me, make me dependent, make me sign things, make me trust. Then I found the folder labeled Plan_B. Keith had mentioned this 3 weeks ago. Silas's backup strategy if the primary plan failed. I'd thought I knew what it was. Fake medical records, guardianship petition, legal control. I was wrong about the scope. The file opened. The first document was titled Medical_Evidence. My own signature at the bottom. Except I'd never signed it. Never seen it. This was a medical evaluation from a Dr. Harrison Caldwell, the same phantom doctor who'd called Keith months ago. Detailed cognitive assessment, results showing moderate decline, recommendations for supervised care, fabricated, professional, thorough. The next document was worse. Email to Silas's lawyer. Remove L from all documentation. Father takes full liability. Position narrative as elder, attempting unassisted financial management while cognitively impaired. Any questionable transactions get attributed to his declining mental state, not our guidance. Another email. If questioned, position as elder abuse case in reverse. Son discovering father's cognitive decline too late. Son trying to protect inheritance from incompetent parents' poor decisions. Silas hadn't just planned to steal my money. He'd planned to make me the criminal. Every forged signature would become evidence of my incompetence. Every unauthorized transfer would be my confused attempt at financial management. Every theft would be repositioned as my own mental decline making poor decisions. And he would be the concerned son, trying to help, trying to protect the family assets from a father who was no longer capable. The medical records would prove I was impaired when I signed documents. The witnesses would testify to my confusion. The pattern of poor decisions would demonstrate declining capacity. I wouldn't just lose my money, I'd lose my freedom, my reputation, my credibility. Courts would see an elderly man who needed protection, a guardian to manage his affairs, possibly even criminal charges for financial mismanagement or fraud that I'd committed while mentally incompetent. Silas would walk away clean, the son who tried his best, the victim of his father's decline, and I would be the criminal, incompetent, unstable, legally liable for crimes my own son had committed. The file labeled medical evidence showed Vernon Hayes, age 68, signature dated 6 months ago, agreeing to cognitive assessment. Except that signature wasn't mine. Close, practiced, but not mine. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage crystallizing into something surgical, something precise. Silas had spent 18 months building 2 traps, one to steal my money, one to destroy my mind. And if the first trap failed, the second would spring automatically. Make me the villain, make him the victim. Perfect. Except now I had the blueprints. I looked at my phone. 11:47 at night. Luther would be asleep. Detective Pierce probably working late. I called them both anyway. Because Silas had planned to make me the criminal. That changed everything. When you discover your son planned to make you a criminal, you don't wait. You don't hesitate. You act. I called them both over the next day. Told them we needed to discuss shared asset management. One last family meeting. I set the trap with silence and paper. Sunday night, December 30th. 1 week before the arrest I'd been building toward for 18 months. No warm lights in my living room tonight, just the overhead fixture harsh and fluorescent. Files scattered across the coffee table like evidence at a crime scene, because that's what they were. Silas and Leonie arrived together. He had his briefcase. She wore white silk, both of them performing confidence they didn't quite feel. "Thanks for coming," I said. "I thought we should review some documents together." I didn't offer coffee, didn't ask them to sit, just stood by the coffee table and opened the first folder. Bank statements, 18 months worth. I laid them out one by one, careful and deliberate. Each page a different violation, each transaction a different theft. Silas watched. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out what I knew, what I'd figured out, how much danger he was in. I opened the second folder, land sale documents. The property he'd sold using my forged signature, clear photographs of him signing, date stamps, notary seals, Keith's documentation. Leonie sat down on the couch. Silas remained standing. I opened the third folder, the fake medical records. Dr. Harrison Caldwell's fabricated evaluation, my forged signature, detailed notes about cognitive decline I'd never experienced. "These are interesting reading," I said. 18 months worth. I looked at Silas, just looked, didn't accuse, didn't argue, didn't explain what any of it meant. The evidence spoke for itself. "Do you have anything you'd like to explain?" I asked. Silas's jaw tightened. I watched him make the decision, saw the exact moment he chose to activate Plan B instead of coming clean. "Dad, you weren't well when you signed these," he said. His voice had that patronizing tone he used when lying. "We both know that. You've been confused lately, making poor decisions. It's okay, it happens at your age." He pulled out his phone, called someone, put it on speaker. "Michael, it's Silas Hayes. I need you to send over my father's medical documentation, the cognitive assessment from Dr. Caldwell. Yes, tonight. Email is fine." He hung up, looked at me with something like pity. "I have documentation from your doctor, Dad. Cognitive decline, confusion, memory lapses, all the signs we've been seeing for months. If you want to push this to court, if you want to make accusations, we can do that. But it'll only prove what everyone already suspects, that you're not capable of managing your own affairs anymore." For 3 seconds, Silas thought he'd won. I could see it in his eyes, that flash of relief. He'd deployed his backup plan, the cognitive decline defense, the switch from predator to concerned son. He thought he'd found the escape route. Leonie sat on the couch, hands folded in her lap, watching. She didn't support him, didn't refute him, just watched, silent, already calculating her next move. Silas didn't realize she'd already chosen her side. Interesting strategy, I said. The doorbell rang. I walked to the door, opened it. Detective Desmond Pierce stood on my porch in a dark suit, briefcase in hand. He'd aged in the months since I'd first met him, the weight of this investigation showing in the lines around his eyes. But tonight there was something like satisfaction in his expression. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "I believe we discussed 8 o'clock. "Right on time," I said. I let him in. He walked past Silas without acknowledgement, set his briefcase on the coffee table, opened it with careful precision. The first document he pulled out was thick, official, legal weight to every page. "Mr. Hayes, these are the trust documents your wife Ruth established 8 years before her death. $3.1 million held in irrevocable trust, protected from creditors, lawsuits, bankruptcy, and any claims of incompetency or guardianship. The funds are completely untouchable." He laid them on the table. Silas stared. "Your son appears to be operating under the impression that cognitive decline would allow him to challenge your financial decisions," Detective Pierce continued. "But there's a problem with that strategy." He pulled out another document. Certificate, official seal, professional letterhead. "This is Dr. Morrison's psychiatric evaluation from June, 6 months ago. Full cognitive assessment, battery of tests, results cognition, normal capacity, full no signs of decline or impairment. Dr. Morrison is board certified, practiced for 30 years, and his evaluation would hold up in any court in the country." Dr. Morrison's signature at the bottom of the report, dated June 2022, 6 months before Silas fabricated his fake medical records. Detective Pierce looked at Silas. "The medical records you just referenced, Dr. Harrison Caldwell, that doctor doesn't exist in any legitimate medical system. No license, no practice, no board certification. Your documentation is fabricated, and attempting to use fabricated medical records in a legal proceeding is fraud." Silas's face changed, not all at once, slowly, like a building that had just discovered it was built on sand. "We coordinated this evaluation 6 months ago," Detective Pierce said, "when we first suspected someone might try to claim incompetency as a defense. Your father was very clear about wanting documentation of his mental state before any accusations were made. Plan B collapsed in 4 minutes. Every piece Silas tried to play, Detective Pierce countered. The fake doctor, the fabricated records, the cognitive decline narrative, all of it dismantled methodically." Silas sat down, finally, heavily. Leonie still hadn't moved, still watching. The predator who'd seen this play before and knew how it ended. "Is there anything else you'd like to try?" I asked Silas. He didn't answer. Silas's face didn't collapse all at once. It fell apart piece by piece like a building that finally runs out of steel. First the certainty, then the defiance, then the contempt, then everything. After Plan B collapsed, Silas had 1 week. 1 week to realize how completely he'd lost. 1 week before I called him back for the final meeting, January 6th. The arrest night I'd been building toward for 18 months. The safe had held the truth for 3 months, waiting for this moment. 9:47 p.m. Silas and Leonie sat in my living room again. Detective Pierce stood by the window, Luther beside him. Police cars parked outside with lights off, engines idling in the January cold. I walked to my study, opened the safe. The folder inside wasn't money. It was an FBI Financial Crimes Unit report I'd received 3 months ago. Detective Pierce had coordinated it. Official letterhead, federal seal, every asset documented. I brought it back to the living room, set it on the coffee table. "One more thing you should see," I said. I opened the folder. Read aloud. "My total net worth, $4.2 million. All recorded in irrevocable trust before you began your plan. Protected. Untouchable." Silas stared. "The land you sold," I continued. "The one worth $180,000, I put it out of trust. Deliberately, for you to take." I looked at my son. "You didn't steal my property, Silas. You stole your evidence. Every dollar you took was bait. Every signature you forged was recorded. Every transaction was documented. 18 months of theft, and every dollar was a nail he'd driven into his own coffin. You were never going to get the money," I said. Because it was never accessible. Ruth protected it 8 years ago. She saw you coming before you even started. The 4.2 million had always been safe. The assets Silas stole were deliberately exposed. The trap had worked perfectly. Leonie stood up. No warning, no explanation. She just stood, reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She opened the recording app, turned the screen toward Detective Pierce. I recorded everything tonight, she said. All of it. Silas activating Plan B, the fake medical records, the threats. Every word. She placed the phone on the table in front of Detective Pierce. I'm fully cooperating, she said. She said, I need an agreement. Immunity for testimony. I'll provide everything, messages, documents, recordings, but I'm not going down alone. Silas looked at her like she was a stranger. You too, Leonie. She didn't answer, didn't even look at him. Just kept her eyes on Detective Pierce. The predator who'd planned to betray me had been betrayed by her own partner, who had planned to betray her, and now she was betraying him first. A perfect circle of treachery. Detective Pierce picked up the phone, checked the recording, nodded. We'll discuss terms, he said, after the arrest. Silas stood up, started toward the door. I think I should leave, he said. His voice was calm. Too calm. The voice of someone in shock. You can't, I said. He stopped, turned. You can't keep me here, Dad. You're not a cop. You're just an old man with paranoid delusions about his own family. You're right, I said. I'm just an old man, but Detective Pierce is a cop, and Luther is a witness, and those police cars outside aren't paranoid delusions. I picked up my phone, the same phone I'd been holding that first night when this story began. When I'd sat in darkness with Detective Pierce beside me, waiting for Silas to arrive so we could spring the trap. We'd come full circle, back to the beginning, except now Silas understood what was happening. Luther's hand touched my shoulder, steady, silent, the only warmth in a room full of wreckage. I pressed the number, held the phone to my ear. It rang once. Mr. Hayes, the voice on the other end. Dispatcher, professional, waiting for confirmation. It's time, I said. Through the window, I saw the police car lights flash on, blue and red washing across my driveway. 2 unmarked vehicles, 4 officers. Units are in position, the dispatcher said. We're proceeding now. I hung up. Silas saw the lights, saw the officers approaching the house, saw Detective Pierce step toward him with handcuffs already in hand. Silas Hayes, Detective Pierce said, his voice formal procedural. You're under arrest for theft, fraud, forgery, attempted poisoning, and attempted financial exploitation of an elder. You have the right to remain silent. The words I'd imagined for 6 months, the scene I'd rehearsed in my head 100 times, seen Silas in handcuffs, watching him realize he'd lost everything. In my imagination, it had felt like victory. In reality, it felt like death. Silas didn't resist, didn't argue, just stood there while Detective Pierce read him his rights, cuffed him, led him toward the door. He looked at me once, just once. I'm your son, he said. I know, I said. That's what makes this so hard. They took him outside. I watched through the window as they put him in the back of the police car. Leonie stood beside Detective Pierce watching her partner taken away. No emotion on her face, just calculation. She'd made her deal, saved herself. That was all that mattered. The police cars pulled away, red and blue lights fading into the January night. Luther and Detective Pierce stayed for another hour. Paperwork, statements, official procedures that would continue for months. But the essential part was done. Silas was in custody. The evidence was overwhelming. The case was solid. I'd won. Luther left around midnight. Detective Pierce shortly after. Leonie was escorted to the station by an officer who would keep her under observation until the formal cooperation agreement was signed. I sat alone in my living room, files still scattered across the coffee table. Evidence of 18 months of systematic betrayal. I'd called this number in my head 100 times over 6 months. Imagine this moment. Rehearse this victory. Hearing it ring for real was the loneliest sound I'd ever heard. 4 months after I made that phone call, I stood outside courtroom 3B in the Dawson County Judicial Center, watching strangers hurry past with their own catastrophes, tucked under their arms. May sunlight poured through the tall windows, making everything look cleaner than it was. I'd been here twice before for Ruth's estate matters, paperwork signed in hallways, lawyers murmuring about tax implications. This time I was here to watch my son answer for what he'd done to me. Paloma arrived at 9:15, 15 minutes before the hearing. She wore navy blue professional, but not severe. Miguel wasn't with her. "Dad's parking the car," she said before I could ask. "He didn't want me to wait alone. Probably wise. I keep thinking about what I'm going to say up there." She adjusted the strap of her purse, a nervous gesture I'd never seen from her before. "Detective Pierce said it should be about what I saw, about why I came forward." "You came forward because you knew it was wrong," I said. "That's the only reason that matters." She nodded, but didn't look convinced. We went inside together. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined from watching crime dramas. Maybe 30 seats, wood paneling that looked original to the 1970s fluorescent lights that hummed. Judge Marion Dalton, a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair and reading glasses on a chain, was already at the bench reviewing documents. The bailiff stood near the side door where they'd bring Silas in. Detective Pierce sat in the front row. He caught my eye and nodded. Luther was 2 rows back, his expression unreadable. He'd offered to skip this, said he didn't need to witness it, but I'd told him the same thing I'd told myself: we finish what we start. The prosecutor, a trim man named Aaron Vance, had explained the plea deal to me 3 weeks earlier in his office downtown. "Your son's attorney negotiated hard," he'd said, "but the evidence was overwhelming. Pleading guilty was his only real option. What does he get? 24 months probation, full restitution of $205,000. 300 hours of community service specifically helping seniors with digital financial literacy." I'd almost laughed at that last part. Silas teaching elderly people how to protect themselves online, how to spot scams, how to secure their banking passwords. The irony was so sharp it could draw blood. "And if he violates probation?" I'd asked. 18 months, in county lockup, automatic. Now sitting in the courtroom, I wondered if Silas understood how close he'd come to prison. How close he still was. The side door opened. Silas walked in wearing a charcoal suit I didn't recognize. Hands free. No cuffs, followed by his attorney, a woman named Jennifer Hale, who charged $300 an hour to make guilty men look repentant. He'd lost weight. His face had a grayish quality, like meat left too long in the refrigerator. He didn't look at me as he sat at the defendant's table. "All rise," the bailiff said, though Judge Dalton was already seated. We stood anyway, sat again when she gestured. The hearing moved with bureaucratic efficiency. Jennifer Hale confirmed Silas understood the charges: elder financial exploitation, forgery theft, by deception, attempted poisoning. He answered, "Yes, Your Honor," in a voice so flat I barely recognized it. Judge Dalton asked if he'd entered his plea freely without coercion. Another yes. Had he reviewed the terms of the agreement? Yes. "The court recognizes Paloma Vargas for a witness statement," Judge Dalton said. Paloma stood, smoothed her skirt, walked to the microphone. Her hands shook slightly as she unfolded a piece of paper, but her voice came out steady. "I'm here because Mr. Hayes was always kind to me. He gave me candy at Halloween. He asked about my school. He treated me like I mattered." She glanced at the paper but didn't read from it. "That Saturday night I couldn't sleep. I looked out my window and I saw something wrong happening to a good man. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough." She paused. "My father taught me that when you see something wrong, you say something, even when it's scary, especially when it's scary. That's why I'm here." She folded the paper, walked back to her seat. Miguel put his hand on her shoulder. I wanted to tell her she'd done it perfectly, but the bailiff was already calling the next item. Judge Dalton reviewed the sentencing terms aloud: probation, restitution, community service. Then she removed her glasses and looked directly at Silas. "Mr. Hayes, you targeted your own father, a 68-year-old widower still grieving his wife, for financial exploitation. You forged documents, you coordinated with others to deceive him, and you did it for money you didn't need to survive. You did it for comfort, for convenience." She paused. "The only reason you're not going to prison today is because your father asked me not to send you. He wrote a letter on your behalf. Did you know that—" Silas's head turned slightly. Not enough to look at me, but enough that I knew he'd heard. "This court accepts your guilty plea and imposes the agreed sentence. You're dismissed." It was over in 37 minutes. I left through the side exit to avoid the hallway chaos, took the stairs down instead of the elevator. Luther caught up with me on the second floor landing. You wrote him a letter, he asked. I wrote the judge a letter, I corrected. I told her prison wouldn't restore what he took. That restitution and service might teach him something incarceration wouldn't. You believe that? I pushed open the door to the ground floor. I believe Ruth would have wanted me to try. Outside, the May heat hit like a wall. I was halfway to my truck when I saw Leonie standing near the parking garage entrance watching the courthouse doors. She wore sunglasses and a plain dress, her hair pulled back. She'd lost weight. For a moment, I thought she might approach, might say something, but she just stood there. Then she turned and walked away without acknowledgement. She'd kept her cooperation agreement, testified to everything. Because of her, the case against Silas had been airtight. But cooperation wasn't the same as remorse, and we both knew it. I got in my truck and drove home. Detective Pierce caught up with me before I reached my truck. He held a manila envelope, the same kind Ruth used to organize her estate documents, creased from months, in an evidence locker. Judge released this today, he said. It was sealed with the letter you found in your study. Ruth's instructions said you weren't supposed to read the second part until after the trial. The envelope had been waiting 4 months to be opened. I took it, felt the weight of a single folded page inside. Pierce nodded once and walked back toward the courthouse, leaving me alone in the parking lot with Ruth's final words. I opened it, standing between 2 SUVs, the May heat, making the paper warm in my hands. My dearest Vernon, if you're reading this, the worst is over. You did the right thing. I know you did because you've never known how to do anything else. By now, you've seen what Silas became, and I'm sorry I won't be there to hold your hand through it. But I need you to understand something. I knew. Not everything, not the details, but I saw the shape of it forming. The entitlement, the shortcuts, the way he looked at money like it was owed to him instead of earned. I saw it getting worse after we lost the baby in 2006, saw the woman he chose feeding it instead of fixing it. I wanted to be wrong. I prayed I was wrong, but I prepared for being right. Do you remember when I insisted we reach out to the Vargas family 8 years ago? You thought I was being impulsive, involving neighbors so closely when we barely needed help yet. I told you it was about community. That was true, just not the whole truth. I met Miguel at that neighborhood association meeting in 2015. Steady, honest, raising a sharp little girl on his own after his wife passed. When he mentioned how closely he watched over the street, I saw what you needed, Vernon. Not just a neighbor, a guardian. I knew that if things went the way I feared, you'd need someone nearby who understood loyalty. Someone raising a child who'd see through charm and performance. Someone who'd choose you when the moment came. So I cultivated that friendship and I watched it become something real. Not to manipulate you, never that. But to make sure you wouldn't be alone when you needed someone most. Don't be lonely anymore, Vernon. The people who deserve you are already there. You just need to look. With all my love, Ruth. P.S. The estate structure wasn't just about protecting money. It was about protecting you from having to choose between your son and your survival. I made that choice for you, darling. Forgive me if I overstepped. I read it twice, then looked up. Miguel stood 10 steps away near the courthouse entrance, adjusting Paloma's collar while the girl scrolled through her phone. They were waiting for me. I realized that now. Paloma glanced over, caught my eye, offered a small smile that asked if I was okay. Ruth had known 8 years ago exactly where I'd end up, and who would be there. She'd been playing chess with a board I couldn't see, and her final move was kindness. I folded the letter, slipped it back into the envelope, and walked over. You all right? Miguel asked. Ruth says hello, I said, holding up the envelope. Something shifted in his expression, understanding maybe or recognition that Ruth's plans had always run deeper than any of us realized. Paloma looked up from her phone, sensing the weight of the moment, even if she didn't understand it. She sounds like she was something, Miguel said quietly. She was everything, I corrected. We stood there in the May sunshine, 3 people bound together by a woman who'd seen the future clearly enough to build scaffolding against the collapse. I didn't know yet what that meant for us, for me and Miguel and Paloma, for the strange family we'd become through crisis and circumstance. But I knew Ruth had been right about one thing. I wasn't alone. 2 months later, I drove to the Savannah Community Center to drop off paperwork for a property tax exemption Luther had filed on my behalf. The community center handled senior services, including the program where Silas was serving his 300 hours. I'd avoided the place deliberately, didn't want to risk an encounter neither of us was ready for. But the tax office was only open until 4, and I'd promised Luther I'd submit the forms before the deadline. I was halfway to the main office when I passed a room with a glass door and saw him. Silas sat at a long table across from an elderly woman with white curls and a floral cardigan, his laptop open between them. He was pointing at the screen, patient, his voice muted by the glass, but his posture relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. The woman, Helen Foster, according to the name tag visible on her sweater, nodded slowly, then reached out to click something with the mouse. Silas smiled, said something encouraging. She clicked again. "No, Mrs. Foster, that's perfect," I heard faintly through the door. "You did it exactly right. Now you can check your account anytime without calling the bank." She beamed like she'd just discovered fire. "Thank you for your patience with me," she said. Watching Silas help someone else's father felt like seeing a ghost learn to be human again. He hadn't seen me standing there. I could have walked in, could have said something to acknowledge the work he was doing, the effort he was making. Part of me wanted to. But redemption, like trust, can't be rushed. It's built in invisible increments. Small acts repeated until they become character. Silas teaching Helen Foster to protect herself online wouldn't erase what he'd done to me. But it was a start. Maybe the only kind of start we'd get. I stood there for 3 minutes, maybe 4, watching through the glass. Then I turned and walked to the tax office, submitted my paperwork, and drove home. I didn't go in that day. Redemption, like trust, can't be rushed. But for the first time since the arrest, I could imagine a future where we spoke again, where father and son meant something we could rebuild instead of something permanently broken. The final conversation still needed to happen, but it didn't need to happen today. The conversation happened 3 weeks later, but not the one I'd expected. Luther called on a Wednesday afternoon while I was replacing the hinges on Ruth's garden gate, one of those small repairs that had been waiting 2 years for me to stop surviving long enough to actually live. "She's gone," he said without preamble. "Left Savannah Hilton Head an hour ago." I knew immediately who he meant. Some exits are quieter than the betrayals that earned them. "You were there? Felt like someone should be—" Luther said. "Not for her. For the record. Make sure she actually got on that plane." Leonie's cooperation agreement had been finalized 2 weeks after Silas's sentencing. Detective Pierce had explained it to me in his office, the terms laid out like surgery instructions: clinical, necessary, unpleasant, full cooperation in exchange for prosecutorial immunity in Georgia. She'd testified to everything, the timeline of her relationship with Silas, the planning that started before Ruth died, the forged documents, the digoxin in my coffee, the coordinated bank calls. Every question answered, every detail confirmed. Her testimony had made Silas's guilty plea inevitable, but immunity wasn't absolution. The agreement required $25,000 in restitution, her share of what they'd stolen from the flagged account. It barred her from setting foot in Georgia for 10 years, a voluntary exile that would become criminal trespass if violated. And it required her to surrender any claim to the Hayes name, the house on Whitaker Street she'd lived in for 3 years, and the life she'd built on foundations made of lies. "One suitcase," Luther said. "I watched from the coffee shop near security. She checked in alone, went through TSA alone. No one to see her off, no looking back." I set down the screwdriver, wiped my hands on my jeans. The afternoon sun slanted through the oak trees, making shadows that looked like prison bars across the lawn. Where was she headed? Charleston. Officially family. Unofficially. Luther paused. Charleston PD reopened their investigation into Roland Whitmore's death. The cooperation agreement required her to make herself available for questioning. Roland Whitmore. The name from the files Luther had found back when this all started, when Leonie was still just a daughter-in-law, I didn't quite trust, and Ruth's letter was still unread. Roland Whitmore himself dead at 62 from what the coroner had called cardiac complications. No autopsy requested by the widower. Estate settled quickly. Insurance paid out within 90 days. The same pattern she'd tried to run on me, just with better lawyers this time. So she cooperated her way out of one court system and into another. I said, "That's about the size of it. The agreement stands cooperation for freedom, but not absolution." Luther's voice carried something I couldn't quite name. Not satisfaction, not pity. Maybe just the exhaustion of watching justice be both served and insufficient. Georgia can't touch her now. South Carolina might have other ideas. I thought about the woman I'd seen outside the courthouse after Silas's sentencing, standing near the parking garage without acknowledgement, already calculating her next move. She'd looked smaller than I remembered, like the scaffolding of her deception had been the only thing holding her upright. Without it, she was just a woman in her mid-30s, with a history she couldn't outrun, and a future that had narrowed to a single corridor. Did she think about Silas as she walked through security? Or had she already erased him the way she'd planned to erase everyone else? Did she regret the conspiracy, the poison, the years spent stealing from a widower who'd welcomed her into his family? Or did she only regret getting caught? I'd never know. That was part of the bargain, too. Her exit meant I didn't have to carry the weight of her presence anymore. Didn't have to wonder if I'd see her at the grocery store or the farmer's market. Didn't have to rehearse what I'd say if we passed on the street. She was gone. Savannah would forget her within a year. Silas might take longer. You think Charleston will charge her? I asked. Depends what they find. The case went cold because there wasn't enough evidence to overcome reasonable doubt. But that was 8 years ago before she left a trail of financial crimes across Georgia. Luther exhaled slowly. Patterns matter, Vernon. She established one here. Charleston detectives are smarter than she gave them credit for. They're waiting for her, and they've got 8 years of watching her playbook to work with. I picked up the screwdriver again, fitted it to the next hinge screw. The physical work helped, kept my hands busy while my mind processed the mathematics of consequences. Leonie had avoided prison. She'd avoided a criminal record in Georgia, but she'd lost. Silas lost the house, lost that identity she'd constructed, lost the state she'd tried to make home. And now she was flying into the gravitational pull of an old investigation that had been waiting patiently for her to make mistakes, loud enough to be heard 2 states away. That was justice, I supposed. Not the clean kind from courtroom dramas, where guilty verdicts bring closure and sentences feel proportional. The messy kind where consequences arrive in waves instead of all at once, where winning means you get to keep what was yours to begin with, and losing means you spend years paying back what you never should have taken. She earned it, I said finally. She did, Luther agreed. Charleston, the investigation, all of it. She earned every mile of that flight. We talked for a few more minutes about paperwork, restitution payments, final documentation for the court, the trust disbursements that would happen now that all criminal proceedings were complete. Then Luther said he had another call and hung up, leaving me alone in Ruth's garden with a half-repaired gate and the afternoon turning gold around me. I thought about Leonie sitting on that plane 30,000 feet above consequences she couldn't see yet but had to know were waiting. No Silas to deflect to this time. No elderly widower to manipulate. No trust fund to raid or bank account to empty. Just Charleston and Roland Whitmore's family and detectives who'd spent 8 years watching a case go cold and wondering if they'd missed something. Whatever she was going to face there, she'd earned it. And unlike Silas, she would face it alone exactly as she'd lived, exactly as she'd planned for everyone else. The final chapter remained where I would go from here. I found where I would go on a Saturday morning in September, sitting at an outdoor table in the Starland district with Silas across from me and 2 cups of coffee between us. Healing starts with silence and sunshine. He'd asked to meet 4 months earlier, sent a text through Luther because he didn't have the right to contact me directly. I'd sat with that message for a week before responding, then 3 months before suggesting a date, then another week, choosing the location somewhere public neutral, with escape routes if I needed them. We'd been sitting 10 minutes without speaking. Not loaded silence or brittle quiet, just 2 men at separate tables drinking coffee while the September morning washed over us in gold. Those 10 minutes mattered more than any conversation we'd had in 3 years. Finally, Silas set down his cup, lines around his eyes I didn't remember from before the trial. I don't know where to begin, Dad. The title landed like a question, testing whether I'd accept it. I let it sit for a moment. Then don't begin anywhere, I said. Just have coffee. Relief crossed his face, small, careful, like a man who'd learned not to expect grace. We sat another hour watching people walk past with groceries and dogs and Saturday errands. He told me about the community service work, the seniors. He was helping how Helen Foster brought him banana bread last week. I told him about the garden, the repairs, the quiet rhythm of living alone that had stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like choice. We didn't talk about Leone, didn't talk about the money or the forged signatures or the night I called the police. Those conversations might come later or they might stay buried. Can I stay a little longer? He asked when the cups were empty. I nodded. We ordered refills and stayed another hour, and when we finally stood to leave, I didn't offer a hug or a handshake, just a nod that said we'd done enough for one day. That was September. In November, I spoke at the Savannah Community Hall about elder financial exploitation. Luther had suggested it months earlier. The local senior advocacy group needed speakers. I'd refused twice before saying yes. The room held maybe 40 people, mostly over 60, a few middle-aged children with aging parents. Miguel sat in the third row with Paloma beside him. Luther stood near the back door, arms crossed. I talked for 20 minutes. Told them about warning signs I'd missed, how love and trust become vulnerabilities when people who should protect you decide to exploit you instead. I didn't name Silas, that wasn't the point. Love without boundaries isn't love, I said, gripping the podium. It's vulnerability waiting to be exploited. The people closest to you, the ones who know your routines, your passwords, your weaknesses, they're either your greatest protection or your greatest threat. You get to decide which by how clearly you draw the lines. I told them I wasn't there because I'd won. I'm here because I survived. If one person hears this and protects themselves, that's enough. When it ended, people came up to share their own stories. Thank me for speaking. I was talking to a woman whose nephew had emptied her savings when I noticed Luther moving toward the back row, picking something up from an empty chair. He brought it to me after the crowd thinned, a small piece of paper, folded once 3 words in handwriting I'd known since Silas learned cursive in 3rd grade. I heard Dad. Luther watched my face. He was in the back row, left right before it ended, didn't want to make a scene. Those 3 words cost more than any restitution check Silas would write over the next 18 months. Not an apology or excuse, just acknowledgement. He'd been there. He'd listened. He'd heard what I said about boundaries and betrayal and love that protects instead of takes. Time didn't heal wounds. It just gave you enough distance to see the scars without flinching. That was November. January came quietly. 1 year after the arrest, I sat at my kitchen table on a Saturday morning with the newspaper spread in front of me and coffee steaming in Ruth's favorite mug. The same ritual, the same light through the east window, the same oak tree making shadows on the lawn. But there were 2 more cups on the table now. Paloma poured coffee into 1, added cream, the way she'd learned I preferred, set it near my elbow without comment. She moved through the kitchen like she'd always belonged there, which if Ruth's letter was right, she had. 8 years of careful orchestration, Ruth playing chess with pieces we didn't know we were. Through the window, Miguel tended the garden, 60 years old and steady in everything he did. He'd taken over the azalea beds without being asked. Said they reminded him of his late wife, said it felt right to tend something that someone else had loved. I hadn't argued. She's so much like Ruth. Sometimes it scares me, Paloma said, looking at the photograph of Ruth on my desk through the study doorway. Good scared or bad scared, the best kind. I opened the bank statement that had arrived yesterday, scanned the transactions out of habit more than fear. Every entry correct, every withdrawal mine, every balance exactly where it should be. I set it down, looked out at the yard, let myself smile. Ruth had been right about everything, about Silas, about the Vargas family, about the trust structure that would protect me. But she'd been most right about this real love doesn't take. It stays, it protects, it waits. And sometimes if you're very lucky, it makes you coffee on a quiet Saturday morning and asks for nothing in return. The story ended where it began. Same table, same newspaper, same coffee. But everything had changed. I was 70 years old, a widower, a father who'd survived his son's betrayal, and learned to build family from people who chose to stay. Paloma sat down across from me, picked up her cup, met my eyes over the steam. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," I answered. And it was. And to you listening to my story, remember this: the people closest to you should protect you, not exploit you. Looking back, I see where I went wrong. I loved without boundaries. I trusted without verification. I believed that being a good father meant giving everything and expecting nothing in return. That wasn't love, that was vulnerability wrapped in good intentions. Don't make my mistake. Love your family fiercely, but protect yourself fiercely too. The two aren't mutually exclusive, they're both necessary. This father revenge journey taught me something unexpected. Justice isn't always about punishment. It's about truth, finally seeing daylight. When I look at other family stories revenge has shaped, I see the same pattern: good people pushed too far, forced to choose between their own survival and their family's comfort. I believe God put me through this trial so I could warn others. Every father revenge story carries a lesson, and mine is this: healthy boundaries don't destroy relationships, they protect them. Even in family stories, revenge seems like the goal. But restoration is what we're really seeking. Protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. If this resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you had to set boundaries with family? How did you handle it? Please share this with someone who might need to hear it. And if you're not already subscribed to Father's Vengeance, I'd be honored to have you join us. These stories matter, and your voice matters too. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. One final note: this story includes fictionalized elements for storytelling and reflection, but the lessons are real. I hope you never have to walk the path I walked.